Welcome back everyone, I've returned from my little winter vacation and I'm ready to talk some more Dark Souls. Having covered the Kareem trio, I'm going to be talking about something a little more eclectic today. The primary topic is Witch Beatrice, Butterfly Beato, but we're going to cover the Crystal Knight from the Duke's Archives too, as somebody asked that I cover him, or her, quite some time ago, and I've not had the chance until now. There's too little info about him to do an episode all for him, and same for Beatrice to a lesser extent, so I thought I'd throw the two in together, despite not really having much or anything in common. But we'll start with Beatrice. For those who don't know, Witch Beatrice is one of those helpful summons you can enlist in helping you to defeat bosses in the game, and I would wager she's one of the least summoned in the game, along with Paladin Leroy. Unlike Leroy however, she never invades us, so she gets a lot less exposure, so to speak. A lot of people go through the entire game and never see her. That said, she's summoned first against the Moonlight Butterfly, a fight she's extremely useful for, as many players fight the butterfly at low levels without much in the way of ranged options. The help of a witch with powerful ranged magic is a boon indeed. The next fight, however, is against the Four Kings, for which she is not that helpful. In fact, if I have the choice, I would rather not take her. But now you know who she is, if you didn't already, so let's get on with the discussion. Of course, we'll start with her name. Beato is just a nickname after all. Beatrice is derived from Beatrix, and seems to mean voyager or traveller, which is indeed a fitting name for Beatrice, for reasons we will discuss momentarily. But considering we meet her in Darkroot and then in New Londo, she certainly travels, no? But even if we know her name, where did she come from, and why is she here in Nordren? Ah well, as we start with this, remember that we only ever summon Beatrice. We never see her in human form, so to speak. She also has no dialogue whatsoever. Let's start with the item, shall we? You can grab her set from a corpse in the Valley of the Drakes after beating the Four Kings. And when you do, you'll be pleased to know that you can wear it even as a male. There's no Demon's Souls-esque gender-specific sets, something I'm pretty happy about, but the description is rather interesting. Cloak of the Rogue Witch Beatrice. Almost all magic users that employ catalysts studied at Dragon School, but Beatrice is one of the few exceptions. She braved the abyss, but did not live to tell of her ordeal. And then we have her catalyst, found with her cloak. Catalyst belonging to Beatrice, the Rogue Witch, contrasts with Vinheim catalysts. This ancient catalyst shows signs of being used for age-old sorceries. It has passed the hands of many generations to get here. Now, that is some fuel for speculation right there. The Dragon School in Vinheim is where all sorcerers learn their trade in the soul arts, manipulating the power of the soul and unleashing it to devastating effect. There is another school of magic in the game, the magic of Ulasil, and then we have the Rogue Witch Beatrice. Now, what does that make you think of? To me, I imagine a witch living out in a dark forest, learning sorcery from her mother or grandmother, who was taught by her mother in turn, and so on, for generations. That is the sort of backstory I envisioned for Beatrice. But why did our Rogue Witch travel to Lordran? Why on earth did she attempt to brave the abyss, which claimed even mighty Artorias? Well, to answer that, we may have to look into the unused and cut content that exists in the data abyss of Dark Souls. Did you know there was once to be a covenant with Velka, and if you joined that covenant you would receive a ring, the description of which mentions that Velka, the goddess of sin, is an eccentric witch. Now, that doesn't have too much bearing here, but I thought it was interesting that it referred to her as a witch. It is the only mention of a witch in the game as far as I'm aware, besides, of course, Beatrice and the Witch of Izalith. Now, Velka is presumably a miracle user, yes? That would mean a witch is used to refer to one who uses magic, pyromancy and miracles. Beatrice uses sorcery. The Witch of Izalith, well, she kind of used pyromancy I suppose, and Velka used miracles. Don't you find that interesting? Things become even more interesting if you remember Yuria from Demon's Souls, who there was some, I can't remember because I've never played Demon's Souls, but I remember from watching some videos of it, there is some thing between her and a miracle user in the game, if I remember correctly. But as for why Beatrice challenged the abyss, well, also looking at the cut content, there exists a model for a child version of Beatrice. Now what could that mean? She was supposed to be a child? Or there were two versions of her, one from the past, one from the present? Or was she perhaps trapped in the form of a child? What do you think? Is it possible Beatrice was originally designed to be a child, perhaps as a reference to Schierke from Berserk? Handy picture, because I have no idea how to pronounce that. Or perhaps she was trapped in a child's form, much like Dusk was trapped in the Crystal Golem along with Lyn. Well, not along with Lyn, but you know, Dusk and Lyn, Sieglind, were both trapped in golems. And how can we forget the possibility that she was a child of Ulasil, aghast at what she saw, and then dedicated her life into stopping the Abyss? That could provide one reason for why she travelled the Abyss, which also makes good on the meaning of her name, which seems to mean traveller and so on. But why else would she enter the Abyss? Well, why do we enter the Abyss? Did she seek to defeat the Four Kings? Could it be she sought their power, the art of life drain? Those are the two main reasons we enter the Abyss as a player. To destroy the Four Kings and claim their soul for the Lord Vessel, or to seek out Karth and pledge ourselves to the Dark Wraiths. But which would our witch have picked? Yes, I did just say which would our witch have picked. If you consider that she aids us, I don't think that she wanted to become a Dark Wraith. I feel like she's a good character. And where else do we meet her? Why, with the Moonlight Butterfly, of course. Who has a connection to Seath? The dragon created the butterfly. But why is it in Darkroot? We may never know. Unless the butterfly was a natural creature of Darkroot that Seath cloned, so to speak. Or perhaps it is a natural creature of the crystal caves that escaped to Darkroot. But Beatrice helps us destroy it, and ultimately her magic tends to prove superior. She's truly a mysterious character, and it's hard to link her possible 3 locations together. What do Darkroot, the Valley of the Drakes, and New Londo have in common? We find her clothes and her catalyst on what may have been her body in the Valley of the Drakes, which would imply that she did escape the Abyss, perhaps leaving New Londo and ending up in the Valley of the Drakes, where she succumbed at last. Or she died in the Abyss and somehow her corpse went rocketing up a mile or 2. Probably not. One thing we can consider a possibility is that Witch Beatrice heard a tale similar to the one told in Oscar's family, the fate of the undead, and the story of the chosen undead and such. Perhaps she became undead and decided to use the power of her magic to see her adventure through, and the fact that we encounter her in such seemingly random locations is supposed to tell us that, like us, she travels from area to area, making her way through Lordran, only her adventure ended in the Abyss. Now, as for the description of her catalyst that states how ancient it is, I don't believe it means Beatrice is as old as all that. It only means it was handed down since ancient times, from one witch to the next, which kind of reinforces the theory of some witches who live out in the woods or isolated from society, teaching their magic to their daughters, away and free from the Vinheim Dragon School. But perhaps we are reaching at what simply isn't there with our witch. It could be that she is largely just a reference to Yuria from Demon Souls, or Schierke from Berserk, and her appearance in Darkroot is just because they wanted a summon to be available for the Moonlight Butterfly, and well, she's basically the only summon who uses ranged attacks. Tell you what, if I ever meet Miyazaki, I'll ask him about it. Even though I don't speak Japanese, I'll ask him. Now, considering how random her placements can be, I feel that makes a nice segue into the second part of today's episode, the Crystal Knight. To start with, I'm not sure what the official name for the character is, but considering his set describes himself as, well, it describes itself as armor worn by a hollowed knight who was partially crystallized, I feel Crystal Knight is a good enough name for him. I was asked quite a few weeks ago to cover the Crystal Knight. Did you notice him in the thumbnail? He's there. So, who is this knight? We know that he's hollowed, and we know he's partially crystallized. Was he another undead on a pilgrimage who made it as far as the Duke's archives before he succumbed? If so, that would make him far more competent than he appears in-game, and than what most players assume of him. Remember, how many undead make it through Sen's fortress into Anor Londo? For a century, they have tried and failed. The Night King Rendell, Black Iron Tarkus, and even Logan himself. That said, Logan does make it there with our help, and Black Iron Tarkus seems to have made it a little way into Anor Londo. But you gather my meaning, And how much can we trust the words of the crestfallen merchant anyway? But was the Crystal Knight guarding Seath? Did he want to guard Seath? That is assuming he is guarding Seath. See, the poor knight may have simply died fighting Seath so many times that he's now hollow in that corridor, still challenging Seath and still dying, not knowing the secret to Seath's immortality, dying to the dragon, again, and again, and again. But you know what? You know what I think? I think our Crystal Knight hails from the land of Xena. And why, you ask? Well, have a look at his armour, without the crystals sticking out of it. What do you think? My first thought as I looked at it was, how strange. Then I recalled the description of the Adventurers set, which outright describes it as strange. There isn't too much to suggest a connection, but the unusual patterns, colours and form of the armour give me the impression that it comes from Xena. There's also this slight connection in that, what's his name? Domnor of Xena, the Aishwai guy, he sells crystal weapons, suggesting that he may have been to the Duke's archives. Maybe the Crystal Knight was his travelling companion or his bodyguard or something. But if that were the case, and if he had been to the Duke's archives, would he not mention it to us? See, Domnor gives us a few tips. He even mentions the Dragon Covenant. So why doesn't he give us a tip about the crystals and the Duke's archives if he's really been there? Still, load up your game, take a good look at the set, and leave a comment telling me what you think. Just where did this knight come from? Maybe you'll come to the same conclusion as I. And speaking of conclusions, that's it for now. But we're not done with the lore, not yet. Who's next? Well, there's been a hint or two throughout this episode. I'll let you work it out for yourself. Until next time, take care.
I have waited for thee, foolish slave of the gods, and pawn of Frampt. I will kill you, and become the true Dark Lord.